Good morning. Today is March 12th, 2020. The time is 10:03. This is the duly called and noticed meeting of the Texas Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact Commission, and it is being live streamed. It's through the Texas Senate portal. My name is Brandon Hurley. I'm the chairman of the commission. We have with us Commissioner Mundy, Commissioner Morris, Judge Dolgener, and Vice Chairman Salzman. We also have with us Dave Gordon from the Attorney General's office, who we appreciate, and we also have Diane Fulmer, our accountant here, who we cannot live without, and we appreciate her attendance. I see former Representative Lon Burnham in the House. I see Commissioner Janeka. I see all our other friends from TCEQ. We appreciate y'all's attendance. Is there any other elected officials or staff here today? Anybody here from the press? We're obviously running lean and mean today, so we have a quorum and we can proceed. Before we go to our public comment period, we have the unique pleasure of having someone on our commission who is very knowledgeable about a current issue facing us in the public health arena. So I wanted to let Vice Chairman Salzman address us briefly about some public health issues.
So a little public health announcement. I would encourage everyone in here, when you finish this meeting, please go to the restroom and wash your hands thoroughly, at least 20 seconds, soap and water. If you can't wash them, find some hand sanitizer. I would ask politely, if anyone in the room is ill, that you please leave the meeting and watch it via live stream. The World Health Organization is recommending that you practice, to the extent you can, some social distancing, which means you want to try to stay 3 to 6 feet away from people, especially if you're going to be next to them for any length of time. If you need to cough or sneeze, politely request that you do it into your elbow or your shoulder. And they also recommend that if you can avoid shaking hands, things like that, you're probably better off. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if people have them.
And we will talk about this later, but obviously the current health crisis will likely have an impact on our future scheduling as well. What that impact will probably be is it's going to be a to-be-determined situation on when we meet next. Obviously, we have important business to conduct, but if we need to meet by alternate means, we may look into that as well, based on the exigent circumstances. So with that, we can move on to item 4, which is public comment. I know some of you are going to comment on specific line items in our agenda, but does anyone want to address the commission on a general basis? Hearing none, we will move right on to our substantive agenda. And that is starting with item number 5, which is consideration and possible action on import applications. The first one is item 5A, which is the import application of XL Energy Monticello. Commissioners, that's tab 9 in your electronic notebook. And with that, I will turn it over to the Vice Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the Technical Committee has received and reviewed an import application from XL Energy Monticello Nuclear Generating Plant that was received January 9, 2020. It's number 1-0247-00. In this case, Monticello is requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've specifically requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C unstable powdered demineralizer resin and cartridge filters. And those waste streams were approved by TCEQ in letter correspondence dated March 2, 2020. They've requested an authorization for 945 cubic feet and 435 curies. The waste would originate from the state of Minnesota, which is part of the Midwest Compact. It does not require export authorization. And they've requested an agreement that would terminate August 31, 2020. The committee recommends approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
As a quick reminder, everyone in the audience or maybe watching online, the reason we're looking down at our computers is because we have gone to a paper-free system of distributing our notebooks, so everyone has electronic notebooks now. So in case you think we're not paying attention, that's what we're doing. Anyone have any questions for the Vice Chairman on the import application of XL Energy Monticello? Hearing none, we'll move on to a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the import application from Xcel Energy Monticello Nuclear Generating Plant number 1-0247-00. The waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is unstable, and the waste stream is powder demineralizer resin and cartridge filters. Volume is 945 cubic feet. The radioactivity is 435 curies. The waste will come from the state of Minnesota, and the agreement would terminate August 31, 2020.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the import application of Xcel Energy Monticello? Any public comment on the application? Hearing none, we'll move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of Xcel Energy Monticello, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Please reflect that the chair was voting in the affirmative as well. And with that, the motion passes. The next import application is item 5B, which is tab 10 on your notebooks, and it is the import application of Ameriphysics. Mr. Vice Chairman.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from Ameriphysics LLC, received January 28, 2020, number 1-0248-00. In this case, Ameriphysics is a broker who is a licensed waste collector requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've specifically requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C unstable sealed sources, decommissioning waste, dry active waste, and other unwanted radioactive materials, and those waste streams were approved by TCEQ in letter correspondence dated March 2, 2020. They've requested a volume of 100 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 10 curies. They've indicated that the waste will originate from all U.S. states and territories with the exception of Texas and Vermont. And so any waste that would originate from the Southwestern, Rocky Mountain, or Northwest compacts will require export authorization. To date, they have provided various export authorizations and generator authorizations, and so as a commission, we're just going to need to sort of do a check to make sure everything they want to send is actually part of what they've provided. But they've also agreed that if there's anything outstanding, they'll provide that prior to shipment. They've also asked for an agreement that would terminate August 31, 2020, and they've asked that the waste be considered part of a small quantity generator set aside, and based on the waste streams, assuming, and they'd have to prove that none of the waste is coming from a utility generator, that I believe based on the volume and curies, that would be acceptable.
John, are those conditions that are written onto the permit?
Yes, sir.
Yes, they're in the contract that actually come out. Yes.
The technical committee recommends approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And John, this may be a good opportunity to remind everybody what exactly is a sealed source.
The NRC term is a source that's typically double encapsulated in like a welded stainless steel capsule. They're typically very size-wise. They're actually very small, perhaps a few millimeters to at most a couple of centimeters in length, and maybe a centimeter or two in diameter at the most.
And why does it matter to us?
Well, sealed sources are in many cases used by small quantity generators, universities, hospitals, in some cases industrial generators, and they're used, I would almost say ubiquitously around the United States for various industrial and medical processes. The radioactive material in the source decays, so that if you start out with 100 curies, over time it decays down, and when a source typically decays down far enough, it's not able to provide the same function that it did when it was its original curie content. So they become unusable, or at least they don't continue to provide the same function, and so entities need to dispose of them and typically buy a new source that's back to the original radioactivity. We don't, and I think as a country, we don't want these sealed sources remaining in all these different places, sitting around, not performing a function. If you're not going to use it, I think it's better policy that source be disposed of in a proper, proper, safe location.
And is the disposal process any different for a sealed source than it is?
Well, typically, yes. I mean, for example, a sealed source, you wouldn't put it through a sorting process because it might have still have a relatively high radiation output. So yeah, you would handle it separately, and typically a broker gathers up a lot of sources from a bunch of different generators, and they can put many sources into one 55-gallon drum and then ship it to WCS for disposal.
The other thing I was going to note is this may be the first small quantity generator set aside we have accepted since we passed our rule. Is that correct?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. But I will note that we have our rule now, that instead of it being just a policy, now it is an actual rule in the Texas Register about our small quantity generator set aside. So it will apply to that. Any other questions for the Vice Chairman? Hearing none, I think we'll move on to a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the import application from AmeriPhysics LLC number 1-0248-00. The waste class is Class A, Class B, and Class C. The waste form is unstable. The waste description is sealed sources, decommissioning waste, dry active waste, and other unwanted radioactive materials. The waste will originate from all U.S. states and territories with the exception of Texas and Vermont, and the waste, AmeriPhysics will be required to provide any outstanding export permits and or generator authorizations prior to shipment. The agreement would terminate August 31, 2020, and it will be part of a small quantity generator set aside.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
You want to second it, sir? Or the other two's on the committee's reason.
Done.
It's either me or you,
Done.
I guess. He doesn't-
There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion about item 5B on our agenda, the import application of AmeriPhysics? Any public comment on AmeriPhysics application? Hearing none, we can move on to a vote then. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of AmeriPhysics represented in item 5B, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Please reflect that the chairman is voting in the affirmative as well, and with that, the motion passes. We now move on to item 5C, which is the import application of the University of Missouri Research Reactor. Vice Chairman Salzman.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an import application from the University of Missouri Research Reactor that was received January 29, 2020. It's number 1-0249-00. In this case, the University of Missouri Reactor is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've requested authorization for Class A unstable activated reactor components, and that waste stream was approved by TCEQ in letter correspondence dated March 2, 2020. They've requested a volume of 45 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 225 curies. That waste will originate from Missouri, which is part of the Midwest Compact and does not require export authorization. And the University of Missouri has requested an agreement that would terminate August 31, 2020. The technical committee recommends approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the technical committee on item 5C? I actually have one. Why isn't this a small quantity generator?
My suspicion is because they know they're a nuclear reactor, and our sort of past precedent has been that nuclear reactors are not small quantity generators, and I would agree. I really don't think they are. Even though they're a research reactor, they're not a power generator. They're not a small quantity generator.
Would pickle being the same thing?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what.
That would be my expectation, but I would not be able to provide definitive since I work for that institution. So
I drove by there yesterday.
I'd have to abstain from that conversation.
Yeah. I drove by there yesterday.
Any other questions for the technical committee on item 5C? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion, we approve the import application from the University of Missouri Research Reactor. That's number 1-0249-00. The waste class is Class A. The waste form is unstable. The waste stream is activated reactor components. The volume is 45 cubic feet. Total radioactivity is 225 curies. Waste will originate from Missouri, and the agreement would terminate August 31, 2020.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Yes.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion about item 5C on our agenda? Any public comment on the import application of the University of Missouri Research Reactor? Hearing none, we'll move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import application of the University of Missouri Research Reactor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye. Please
Please reflect that the chair is voting in the affirmative, and with that, the motion passes. And that is all of item 5. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chairman. We will now move on to item 6, which is the report from Dave Carlson of Waste Control Specialist. Oh, and Commissioners, this is item tab 12 in your notebook that has the reports from WCS.
So went on.
Yeah.
Let me go through the site reports. Looking back from September 1st of this past year through today, we've disposed of 19,600 cubic feet and about 4,000 curies of waste in that period. That's the beginning of this past fiscal year to the current date. Our overall disposal so far since inception is just over 169,000 cubic feet, or about 2% of licensed capacity, and about 486,000 curies decayed, which is 12.5% of the currently licensed capacity in terms of curies. There have been no payments. Those are quarterly payments since the last meeting. Total payments to both TCEQ and Andrews County since inception are at this point about $68.2 million. The only other thing I wanted to bring up today, and I think it's important for folks in this venue to at least take a look at it, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission published a Federal Register notice last Friday, and just for reference, that's Federal Register Volume 85, number 45, published Friday, March 6, 2020, page 13076. That discusses transfer of very low-level waste to exempt persons for disposal. It's of interest for a number of reasons, but it does talk about certainly longer-term specific exemptions granted to hazardous and municipal solid waste landfills for disposal of very low-level radioactive waste. Certainly from our perspective, it could have a very significant impact on our business and would be of interest to others as well. So I would ask that you take a look at that and at least review it and form your own opinions.
And can I ask you, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Carlson on that topic? Because I know that's a new issue. Does anyone have any?
I haven't been able to review it yet.
Okay, thank you very much. I did have one question. I've noticed that the in-compact volume has shot up quite a bit in this disposal year. Is there a reason for that?
Let me look at
It says it's 8,768 cubic feet just from September 1 to February 29th of 2020, which is larger than all previous full year disposals.
Yeah, so the in-compact is really driven by Vermont Yankees. So we are seeing the migration of the Vermont Yankee components from Vermont into the disposal facility. So I think that drives most of it.
But it is still a relatively low curie amount compared to previous years. So does that mean you're getting a lot of low activity waste from Yankee?
Right. What we're not seeing this year is irradiated hardware. There have been no shipments of irradiated hardware since the beginning of this fiscal year, September 1st. So that's where you'll see the majority of the curies coming in. So it just happens that the outages that produce irradiated hardware are falling in a cycle where we're not seeing them in this period.
Is there any update on the use of the DOE site I know there was a proposal at one point to maybe make alternate use of that site for some uranium, correct?
So there is a process ongoing in the Department of Energy to complete a record of decision relative to disposal of depleted uranium in that federal cell. It's already in our license, and we dispose of depleted uranium on a routine basis. So there's the possibility that the Department of Energy would complete that record of decision at some point, and then we would see, I suppose, more activity in the federal cell than we've seen for a while.
And I guess the practical question is, does that move the needle for WCS financially, or is it a drop in the bucket, or do you know?
It depends on what the Department of Energy decides to do, so could be either.
Any other questions for Mr. Carlson before we let him go?
Mr. Chairman, could you get Mr. Carlson to email you that document where you can get it to the commissioner?
Oh, the Federal Register?
Yes, so I don't have to.
If you just send me the site or the link, we can just publish it to everyone.
I'll send it to you.
you.
Absolutely.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can now move on to item 7, which is the chairman's report. And I may ask, if she would, Diane to come up to the microphone, because I'm going to make sure I explain the audit correctly. First, fiscal matters. Obviously, we are once again beginning the budget process with the state of Texas. We will be submitting our request to the budget writers soon. That is a very involved process that may involve many of you, so don't be surprised if you hear from me on that topic. The audit that we do is mandated by statute, and I want Diane to, if she will, explain a little bit about what really that audit entails, because the term audit sometimes is kind of vague. So tell us what that audit really means.
It's strictly a financial audit, so all they're doing is looking at the financial records. It's not a test of any of the, approval process or anything that you do as far as the management of the applications. It's strictly a financial audit of the tests and transactions.
And it's done by a third-party auditor,
yes.
Not by the state of Texas, but we have been through a comptroller audit in the past, correct?
Yes,
And that's a different process.
that is a completely different process.
How often does that comptroller audit occur?
That is strictly up to the comptroller. It's not on a set basis, and they have different audits that they can do. The last one that we had was a purchasing audit.
And how long ago was that?
That was 2013, I believe it was.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong when I say this, we put the audit out for bid again, and the only bid we got was our previous auditor that we had used. So we will once again use Monday Rufus for our audit.
Well, we did, and that audit is completed and been approved, and we're just waiting for the final report
Right.
to publish.
So that audit is complete. And then who all does that get submitted to, that audit?
It just gets published on the website.
Okay. And then from a budgetary standpoint, the audit does not make any recommendations of any kind. It simply confirms that the numbers are what we say they are.
Correct. If they found any issues or things, they would have a finding or a recommendation, but there has not been one.
Any questions for Diane before we let her go about? On her behalf, I'll remind everybody to get your reimbursements in.
So what you're saying is really, for my education in this roundhouse, is that the comptroller can do what I call a desk audit anytime. That may be too.
Correct. The state
What you're
auditor's
saying
office.
about
Right.
the purchasing, they just walk in one day and say, well, let's see, are you purchasing? To me, that's kind of a desk audit of what they're doing. I don't know. I may
Right.
have misstated
They can
that.
come in and do, more intrusive audits, but that
Yeah.
has not happened yet.
Any other questions for Diane? Thank you for being here.
Okay.
We appreciate you. The last item on the chairman's report that I wanted to note was we were going to talk about conferences people have been attending and the ones we plan to attend in the future. As a result of the public health issues, The vice chairman was supposed to go to the Waste Management Symposium in Arizona. He did not go. We have the low-level forum coming up in Denver, I believe, starting March 24th. And I asked Dan Schrum, literally immediately before this meeting, if it was still on, because there had been an email yesterday that said it was. And his response was, right now it is still on, but we are seeing many states and organizations with travel bans. And as of right now, we know that the EPA, Massachusetts, NEI, the state of Washington, and Urenco have travel bans. So it sounds like the low-level forum, if it proceeds, will be a little bit more sparse. I think, and I'm going to kind of ask for input on this, is there were 4 of us that I believe were going to attend the low-level forum. I don't know. Obviously, it's up to the individual if they want to attend, but I will open it up to a discussion. And John, this is really looking towards you. If we as a commission should take a position on not attending the low-level forum just based on public health issues.
I think many communities are beginning to look at the issue of whether they want conferences and meetings and events, particularly where people are going to be, a large number of people are going to be in a relatively small space. I would have to say the low-level waste forum is probably on the low side in terms of the number of people where cities are concerned about. And I don't know that there's typically any international travelers that attend the low-level forum. I think my guess is attending the low-level forum is, from a health perspective, probably the risk is probably still relatively low. But the other issue is you have to travel on a plane.
Right.
To get there, unless you're going to drive, and there's more risk traveling on a plane because, unfortunately, and unless a lot of people cancel their plane trip, you're in pretty close proximity to other individuals. Perhaps we should consider, instead of sending 4, maybe we send less or something like that. I mean, I was not intending to go, and I won't be able to go. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think that raises the issue correctly, and so I know Judge and Commissioner Morris, you were 2 of the 4 that were going to go. What are your feelings?
Well, I don't really consider it essential travel, and it was interesting to hear that a number of the parties that I would like to have heard from will not be attending. So
the
that
value
does
goes
dilute
down
the
as well,
value,
right.
yes,
I agree.
of attending.
I'm going to make a guess, too. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the NRC very quickly comes out, or very shortly comes out and says they're not going to attend either.
Yeah. They've already canceled the RIC, and that's their own, so.
So, Judge, what's your feeling?
I've got plane tickets bought, but that's it.
It's a good opportunity to remind everyone that we do have a travel policy now that encourages you to either buy a refundable ticket or buy the insurance, and I think this may be a prime example of why that's important. So that's a good reminder. Well, I think, like I said, my position on it is I really want to leave it up to the individual, because I think this really depends on a very personal decision. So I've not talked to Commissioner Bradford. I don't know what his position will be, but I think I will wait a few more days and see how what the CDC and others say, and if the concern subsides, then I will probably try to attend, because we are supposed to present there. If for some reason we don't think it's safe to go, then I obviously I'm going to leave it up to everybody individually to just make that decision. And it may be out of the low-level forum's hands before it's all said and done. Mm-hmm. Someone may come in and tell them they cannot meet, whether it be the hotel or maybe even the city of Denver or whatever may come in.
Or if enough people cancel,
then they'll cancel it as well.
I would add, you mentioned travel insurance, Brandon. I believe yesterday the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a worldwide pandemic, and in most travel insurance policies there are exclusions related to pandemics. So in essence, even though you have travel insurance, it's likely won't do you any good.
Yes, sir, Dave.
I fly on a lot of planes, and what a lot of airlines are doing now is they're saying that you can refund or change your tickets much more freely over the next month or so.
Yes.
So depending on the airline, you'd have to look at the airline's policy, but some are being much more flexible with changing reservations
Okay,
with no cost.
thank you. Okay, well then obviously, if anyone attends, we will be interested in whatever feedback we can get from the low-level forum. I still think it's an important organization that I think we need to engage very directly and have our voice heard. And so for that reason, attendance may be important. But if nothing happens as a result of the fact that no one's going to attend, then I guess it's not as important. So with that, I will bring up one other thing. We are about to talk about a committee for a contingency plan, but I will introduce that I believe a different committee will also be formed at our next meeting, which we'll talk about later as well. We have discussed the idea of capacity and done capacity studies in the past, and it's something that I think is really relevant, obviously, to our mission, but it's also relevant to make sure that we're all using the same vernacular, understanding the method of reporting, and having kind of a verification on our end of exactly what if any, there are in the way of capacity concerns. So I believe, not today, but maybe by the next meeting, we will announce the formation of a capacity committee that I believe will be chaired by Commissioner Edwards, who's not here today, so we can talk bad about her if we want to. But that, if you have any interest in serving on that capacity committee, please let me know. It will be very important, obviously, and I think we will have the charge of that committee formulated by the next meeting, but it's probably exactly what you think it is, which is, generally speaking, studying and reporting back about capacity and any issues related to capacity at the compact site. So with that, we are through with item 7 on the agenda. We will now move on to item 8, which is discussion of another committee. This is a discussion and possible action on the contingency plan described in section 3.04 of the low-level radioactive waste disposal compact. Before we talk about the committee, I know that we have at least one person, and maybe more, that would like to address the commission on this issue of our contingency plan. So I would invite up Tom Smitty-Smith to provide us some comments. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning, members, and thanks for your attendance. I think we'll be having many more of our meetings in the next year via Skype or some other electronic method. I am here today representing a public citizen, and I want to talk to you about some things that, as I reviewed your contingency plan, which is overall a really good document, it seemed to me that there were some things missing. And so this is in the spirit of suggesting that there might be some opportunities for additional kinds of things. One of the things that I think is really important is to take a look at the worst case scenarios. And not only at this site, but during transportation. And I want to also remind you, as I think you're all aware, that there are other facilities at the waste site that also may affect and trigger an accident and potentially even abandonment of this site by the operator. And so it's important, I think, to take a holistic look at what could go wrong at the federal site or the toxic site that might also complicate this when you're looking at it. I think we ought to look at, where's the money going to come from, in what order, and how fast. We need to train emergency responders and come up with a review of the decommissioning plans to make sure those are adequate. I think we ought to look at the performance-based standards. What triggers the contingency plan going in, and the monitoring sites to make sure that what's being reported is in fact accurate. And what are the criteria that would cause the contingency plan to be triggered? The financial failure of the company, abandonment, failure to maintain a secure site, leakage that's not being controlled, whether it be in the containers themselves or in water incursions into the site, or other threats to public health and safety. Now, I'm an old man now, and I've learned from 40-odd years of messing around in this building that unless you put specificity into your rules and regulations, you may end up getting in litigation over whether or not something like a contingency plan ought to be triggered. So I'm urging you all to think about that in your writing about this. Who makes the decision? And this is in some of your previous writings, a plea to the legislature and the governor and all to figure out who makes the decision. Is it the governor? Is it TCEQ? And what does it take to make that decision happen? Is it an administrative decision? Is it an executive order? Is it a court order? And then who steps in? What's the order by which things, is it the health department? Is it TCEQ that steps in to become the interim auditor or the interim operator? I've got the state auditor down here because in some instances they may well also have other roles. Your radiological emergency team, or DPS, or the Attorney General. Who takes what action in what order? And then what criteria it takes, and how long do various components of this go on? And I think, as you all know, there is also a pending proposal by WCS to create a high-level interim waste site out there. And I think it's important in your thinking about this to look at the high probability that this may end up being licensed, and whether it becomes operational or not, or whether or not there's state legislation that might prohibit it. I think that as you build the fabric of this, I think it's important for you to take a look at how would that fabric be modified to develop a contingency plan for the operation of that site at the state level. So with that, that's all I've got to say, and I'd be more than happy to participate in any committee meetings and to help with research or whatever. As I age, one of the things I'm looking at is that this site is going to outlive us all, and that the foundations we build and this decision hopefully will not be triggered during our lifetime, and never, hopefully, but there is a high likelihood that at some point, some generation after us and all the people who sit behind me are going to have to think about some of these issues. And so the foundations we built in this plan are going to be critical to the successful operation of that contingency plan down the line when somebody dusts it off and blows off the dust and says, oh, somebody in the past figured out what we should do now. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Smith before we let him go? Thank you very much for your input. Ms. Haddon, I do not dare to suggest that Smitty speaks on your behalf, so would you like to comment as well?
I would like to. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. On this occasion, I share the thoughts that were expressed by Tom Smitty Smith, and he was more articulate and more in detail than I will be. I'll be brief today. I would like to also urge you to, as you work on this issue and further look at contingency for the site, excuse me, that you consider some of the research that was done by the state of Nevada, because they went very, very in-depth on the high-level radioactive waste, and while that is not in place or licensed yet, it could be. And that could have huge impacts for this site and ramifications for your work and the entire site as well. Excuse me. And that's all in terms of comments. The comments made by Tom Smitty Smith are comments I would make as well on behalf of Seed Coalition.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Karen before we let her go?
I just
Judge?
have, you talk about Nevada, and that's for the high-level, long-term storage, right? Of
Yes.
high-level nuclear waste. Is that what
Yes.
you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to clarify that because there's so much waste that I just want to clarify what you were talking about.
Yes, exactly. And former NRC Chairman Greg Jesko recently made comments that if that high-level waste came to Texas or New Mexico, it probably would go nowhere else ever. So that is of great concern, and he speaks from a pretty knowledgeable background and position on that. So thank you very much.
Any other questions for Ms. Head? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Burnham, I get the feeling you moved to the front row for a reason. Thank you.
That was not subtle buddy language, was it? I'll be even more brief. On behalf of the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club, I'm the chair of the Nuclear Issues Committee. We want to express the same concerns that Smitty represented for Public Citizen. I hope you'll take those comments into serious consideration, particularly in light of other pending things. Thank you.
Wait, before you leave, any questions for Representative Burnham? Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak on this issue before I break into my soliloquy? I do believe that this is the...
I think Mr. Carlson.
Oh, did you? I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention briefly, I think what Smitty said is important, that we get through this contingency plan and get it in place. At the same time, I think it's important not to conflate what may be two separate issues, and where the responsibility of TCEQ falls and where the responsibility of the Texas Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact Commission falls. So I consider of course you'll have to search statute, but I consider the contingency plan to be really more of a continuity of operations plan to ensure continued operation of the compact waste facility. I believe that's how the statute reads. And many of these other very important issues that Smitty brought up would be already covered in the TCEQ's responsibilities, and they can speak for themselves on that. But I just would ask that those two issues be clearly sorted as we go through this, so that it's a clear responsibility of one group or the other group, instead of sometimes mixing the two.
Any questions for Mr. Carlson?
Or have us do a lot of work and then they show up one day and say, no, this is the real paper right here.
Yes, sir.
Well, I appreciate everyone's comments, and I do believe that it is the most important issue facing us today. It's clearly a statutory obligation. I will say, not knowing who the actual original drafters of the statute were, they did a potentially intentional poor job of giving us direction on exactly what the contingency plan should be. It makes reference to it. It makes a couple of kind of what appear to be sidebar comments about making sure that the state of Vermont has somewhere to dispose or store their waste in the event of a contingent event. But past that, they left us somewhat of a blank slate. And the unfortunate reality, as pointed out in the current draft, is that obviously this is something we can't do alone. We cannot we cannot find funding. Obviously, we cannot enforce certain elements of it, and it's going to take participation of a lot of other state agencies to effectuate a plan like this, because it is probably going to be broad-ranging and touch a lot of different groups. I do think that clearly the things we've been talking about today about our public health issues show the importance of a plan like this, though, because you do not want to be making this plan as you need it. You want it to be in place long before anything happens that you would call a contingent event. So I think it is absolutely critical that we try to move the ball down the field, and I know we, quite frankly, have not gotten as far as we would like to, but I am very proud to announce that we are going to form a committee that will hopefully shepherd this through to conclusion. And I have spoken to Commissioner Mundy, and probably out of ignorance about what he's about to step into, he has agreed to chair that committee. Please don't anyone tell him what a mistake that is after the meeting. But the committee will be made up of Commissioner Mundy, who will be the chair, Commissioner Morris to provide us technical assistance in her wisdom, Commissioner Bradford from Vermont, and then myself. So it will be a committee of 4 people. my hope, and this will be up to Commissioner Mundy, is that this begins a series of informal meetings and communications with many of you here that to take input, to discuss the role that potentially agencies like TCEQ or the governor's office or whoever else may be involved will play in this, because I do think it is something that we need to assimilate through kind of the aggregation of a lot of comments and a lot of thoughts. I think that the way this hopefully will kick off is Commissioner Mundy will kind of set the agenda and the broad ideas of what we hope to accomplish, and from there we will then proceed to starting to knock down those issues. With that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Mundy and make sure he gets to say what he thinks the process will be, and let him speak to it and maybe give us a little more indication of what his intentions are.
Well, I will say I've actually been involved with this kind of issue for some large multinational corporations that were dealing with financial problems where bankruptcy was obviously imminent. We had to deal with them, so I've dealt with it in that arena before on a fairly large scale. So it is a large undertaking. One thing I've found is the more you get into it, you don't even know all the questions till you really start turning the rocks over. But I view it as a cooperative and collaborative process with the operator. I would ask Mr. Gordon to research and let me know what our parameters are about ability to do non-disclosure agreements with WCS, because we will be potentially accessing sensitive information that they have, and inherently some of what this plan would involve, I would think, would mostly want to be kept confidential, or certain aspects. So, you know, what are the boundaries of what we can do with them for non-disclosure agreements, and then also the parameters within the Public Information Act. You know, I don't want to ask for a bunch of information before we know the answers to those two things.
Sure.
And I'll say, Mr. Carlson, you know, I look forward to working with you and come out to the facility and see. I will say this situation with the virus right now really does highlight how unforeseen things can come out of just left field quickly. So I'll say it's partly shocking it hadn't been done to this point, but you know, we're going to get it fixed and do the best we can. I think we'll do a good job relatively quickly. We may not fix everything right off the bat, but something's better than nothing. So I'd like to see us get a good framework in place quickly.
And the other thing that I foresee is that I assume that at some level, some of the contingency plan will lead to at least an identification of potential legislation that we believe is appropriate. So the upcoming legislative session will dovetail hopefully well with what we're doing on our contingency plan. So I do think it is we have a lot to do, but I think the timing is going to work out well. The other thing that I know I speak for Commissioner Mundy and probably all of you in this room when I say is we have an incredibly valuable resource in Andrews, and it's important that we don't lose the value of that resource, that we do what we can to make sure that both for our in-compact generators and, to the extent possible, our out-of-compact generators, that they have a safe and secure place to dispose of their low-level waste. And so I think part of our guiding principle on the committee will be that we want to make sure that the site continues to be an asset and continues to be available for use.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a critical business asset to this state, Vermont, and many other states. So, and I would like to see the operator be successful and
Absolutely.
have everything work as well as can humanly work for them. So like I said, I view this as a collaborative effort with them. Mr. Carlson, I'm going to do everything I can to work with you to make it successful for everybody. And hopefully we never have to crack the book on this at this point. So.
Any other comments? Vice Chairman?
I would just ask that as you all meet and discuss, the federal government has a term called critical infrastructure, and I think perhaps that's that's might be the right term, and when you think about the resource that's in Andrews and how we need to come up with a contingency plan for that.
Any other public comments on our contingency plan? Many of you will be included in this process whether you want to be or not. So,
have it written down.
but we appreciate it, and I look forward to Commissioner Mundy's leadership on this and getting us off dead center and moving towards a workable plan on that. With that, we are through with item 8 of our agenda. We're now on to item 9, which is the discussion and possible action on personnel matters, including the hiring of an admin and an executive director. Let me introduce this concept by saying we're still working towards making those hires, but some ideas have been brought up that I wanted to make sure that I got legal counsel on, because it includes some issues that are of a legal nature. So with that, and based on what I believe the discussion is going to be, I'm going to, at this point, adjourn us into an executive session, which I would think would take no longer than 20 to 25 minutes. So it is now 10:54 a.m. and the commission will now go into a closed session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071 to consult with its legal counsel related to the agenda item number 9. At the end of the closed session, the commission will reconvene in open session in this room. So if everyone wants to take a break for the next 30 minutes or so, we should be back.
Chairman Hurd, can I add, since we're going to go into executive session, can we add a dialogue with Mr. Carlson about anything they have in place for dealing with abnormal number of personnel being ill, like, a contingency
What?
plan for this?
That's a good question. Do you want to ask that question before we go into executive
Well,
session?
I would think that'd be sensitive information, so
That's a good question.
as
Dave,
long
do
as
you,
we're doing it anyway, I think maybe it'd be nice if we can ask him about it.
do you want to talk about that in a public forum, or?
I'll leave, what's,
I think executive session's fine.
yeah.
But before moving forward, I don't know if there's an Open Meetings Act allowance for disclosure of something like that.
Because the closed session can only be those of us on the commission. So what it may be is we may need to seek that information under a confidentiality agreement at a later date.
All right, so give me the non-disclosure answer, then I'll get with
Yeah.
him and we'll go, but
You know where we're
The short
going?
answer is we've been in active preparation for that.
I was assuming so I'm glad you did that.
Yeah, there's a side room.
So where we will go, commissioners, is the side room right over here.
It's not gonna
And like I said, we will be back in about 30 minutes if everyone wants to take a break in the meantime. Thank you.
I can also check to see if there's an available larger room. This one's not
I thought we just
Just so much of it is. And it's already dealt with. Here's where it goes.
I come from the west. Good to see you. How you doing?
You're not, but we
Oh yeah, we're all happy now. But all our travel plans are. Well, UK, their work's coming right now. They're handling things much better in UK, and unless there was a big chain of events, it sounds like UK is probably pretty okay.
I'm hoping.
Yeah, I hope so
So if
too.
there's any way we can be up on it, we're
Yeah. Good for you.
No, it's going all right, Judge.
Hey, are we following you?
We're going to talk about future dates and meetings, which, again,
Wild card.
make us talk about the coronavirus.
Dilbert.
It is now 11:30 a.m., and we are back on the record in open session to continue with agenda item 9. No action was taken in the closed session with respect to this item. As way of update, we are discussing some potential alternative means to hire our staff, and those are still being vetted, both with our legal counsel and potentially other groups. So we will report back as we proceed with that, but we are still intent on hiring staff as soon as possible to make sure our operations are not in any way affected by lack of staff. With that, that is all on item 9, but now we can talk about item 10, which usually is a mundane topic, but today may be a little more interesting, and that is future meetings. At one point, we had discussed potentially going to South Texas Project to have our next meeting, which would be in May. However, based on the current public health issues, South Texas has asked us to delay that meeting maybe until later, which we completely understand and is probably a very good idea. Commissioners, I will just say this. I think anything in the way of future meetings should be considered tentative at this point until we see how things shake out over the next couple of weeks and maybe even month. I don't know if we'll have a place to meet if things begin to go further downhill with the way of public meetings. But currently, the next meeting is set for May 14th. Since it will not be at South Texas, I assume it would be here. But like I said, I think that should be something that we all consider tentative. The next meeting after that was supposed to be July 9th. If we cancel our May meeting, obviously we may try to move that meeting up just to make sure that any generators who need agreements can get before us soon. Then as a long-range reminder, sometime in the month of September or October, we will be going back to Vermont. Yes, Vice Chairman.
When are we required to submit a budget?
It'll be, they haven't filed what the date is because the letter hasn't filed, but it'll be June, July.
So we
will have to have some meeting before then.
Correct.
And so, and what that'll take is the approval of the commission of that proposed budget.
Right.
So we'll definitely, that's a very good point, John. So we'll have to have some meeting before whatever that deadline is. Generally speaking, our budgets are not too controversial and they don't really take a lot of time to consider, but we will definitely need to get together to at least approve that budget proposal that we then send to the LBB. So that may set our next meeting.
And we may hopefully have a personnel matter to decide too.
Right. So I mean,
And you'll have the contracts and the MOU and the contract.
right. So there are means that I believe we can meet remotely if we have to, and we have debated those in the past. Obviously, those meetings are a little less effective and tend to chill the idea of open discussion and kill some of the dynamic. But if push comes to shove, we can obviously try to meet by alternate means as well. So I guess for scheduling purposes, we will keep the May 14th meeting tentatively scheduled for Austin. If we cancel that meeting, we will definitely have some sort of meeting before our deadline for submission of our budget to the LBB and to address some of these personnel issues that we are discussing. So I know that is very indefinite, but I think in light of the current circumstances, it's probably as good as we will be able to do. If any of the commissioners have any intention of attending any conferences, and I know low-level forum is one we talked about, but if there's any other conferences that you believe you were otherwise going to attend, I will just remind you to please get refundable tickets and monitor the situation and make your own mind up about whether or not you think it's appropriate to go. I know the TCQ has a conference that's coming up that some of us like to attend. I don't know if that will move forward or not, but if it does, I think the same rationale applies. So, any discussion or questions about the future meeting dates? Hearing none, I will then entertain a motion to conclude our meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? Thank you all very much.